to separate the great from the good, and will help you adapt to the challenges of hiring remotely. This brings faster hiring, reduces bias, and gives your engineers more time to solve problems that matter. That's why we're already working with some of the best engineering teams in the world. Schedule a demo with us to learn how we can help you shape the future of work today. Codility, remote tech hiring everywhere.
Hello, everyone. The world was forced into an experiment back in March, April 2020, when COVID broke out. And even though the results are not perfect, it's safe to assume that the majority of tech companies will never go back to working from the office 100% of the time. Remote work is the new normal for many engineering teams around the world, and while surveys suggest that working remotely brings additional challenges for 52% of engineers, it also makes 76% of them happier. Working with distributed teams can be a breath of fresh air compared to an in-office setting. However, leading and managing these teams to ensure productive and healthy work culture is not always easy. I'm Snir Yaron, CTO at Codility, and I'm the panel host today. We'll talk about leading distributed engineering teams and how to do that successfully. I've got three impressive and experienced engineering leaders here with me as panelists today. Let them introduce themselves. Anthony, Dillon, please.
Hi, I'm Ant. Everyone calls me Ant. I work at Canonical, the company behind Ubuntu. I've been working here for 10 years now, managing people for around 7. And that's been a mix of both office-based and remote teams. So yeah, lots of experience working across time zones.
Thanks, Ant. Great to have you here. Scott.
Hi, thank you, Snir, for having me. I've been working at Salesforce now for about 11 years. I've been running engineering for our sales CRM product, two main engineering groups within the sales CRM product. One is what we call core Salesforce automation, which is really the bread and butter of our sales product. And the other is a maps-based solution, location intelligence-based solution. Most of my team is in San Francisco, but I work with teams all over the world.
Thank you. Pleasure having you here. Yishai, you're next.
Hi, great being here. So I'm the CTO for LinearB. I've been with, this is a young startup of about 3 years age. I've been with LinearB for almost 20 months now. Our engineering organization of about 25 people is based in Israel. And the other half of our company is based in the US. And we focus on helping developers and dev orgs improve.
Great. Again, a pleasure having you. Let's start with a warm-up question to all of you. When did your organization move to a remote setup? Can you share one unexpected challenge as part of that move, as part of that new setup? How did you resolve it? Ant, you can go first.
Yeah, sure. So Canonical has always been a remote distributed company, and for many years we've been kind of trailblazing the whole tools and processes and async working. One of the things I've noticed the most since over the last 12 months that has changed for us is that we used to meet together in what we call as sprints, but it's where the whole company get together for a week every 6 months. And that really helped to build the team, cross-team relationships between, smaller teams around the company. That has really weakened over the last 12 months, and I put that down to the lack of hallway discussions, the lack of organic team building and socializing with other team members. For example, we recently just did ours last week, and a moment where one project was trying to deal with a technical solution which would have benefited another team. I wanted to hang around. I wasn't sure if the idea was great, so I wanted to hang around and sort of talk to the next person. But of course, we were all in video calls. And so once it finished, everyone jumped off the video call, and that was the end of the conversation. Whereas I would have hung around and caught them for a coffee on the way to the next meeting, and shared my ideas and maybe formed some better ideas. So that's one thing that's really challenged Canonical, I think, in the last 12 months.
Thank you. Scott, how about you? When did your organization move to remote setup, and what was the unexpected challenge that you come across?
Yeah, so for Salesforce, we were mainly an office-based culture and organization up until the start of the pandemic. And so in a matter of days, all of a sudden, all of our employees no longer were working together in an office, but we're now working at home and working as a distributed remote team. So there was a lot of adjustment for us to try to figure out how we could do that in an effective way. One of the interesting observations we had is that within an office, there are certain expectations of an office working environment and how teams work together. For instance, it's expected at your desk, someone can come. It's also expected that when you have a meeting, you can go to a conference room and there's a whiteboard there for you to use if you need it in your conversation. So we had to figure out a way for teams to basically figure out how to work together again. We came up with this concept called team working agreements. And this is essentially a process by which teams come together and they discuss how they're going to work together on a day-to-day basis. And this can include, what are their working hours, right? Especially if you're working across time zones, or in that particular case, right when the pandemic started, kids are home, right? So you may have to take some flexible time to help your kids. Also in those working agreements, what a lot of teams have done have talked about not just how they work together, but also how they connect and have fun together. So that could be, monthly events where teams online can get together and do something outside of work. And so these agreements essentially created a means to set expectations across the team that builds trust, but it also allows the team to connect a little bit even while they're being remote so they can build those relationships.
Nice. It's like a contract. Yishai, how about you?
So LinearB had an office culture, or almost totally in the office here in Israel for the engineering and product organizations, but a remote first culture for our US people doing go-to-market, sales, marketing, and so on. Then when the pandemic hit, we also went remote here in Israel. So half of the company needed to adjust. The other half, it was more business as usual. A couple of interesting things that we saw in that move to, fully remote when everyone was locked down, and then back to some sort of hybrid, which is where we are today, where we have an office, we spend some time at the office, but not a day in, day out, like a full office culture. Mm-hmm. So one thing we saw is a shift in the way the team works around, the very day-to-day tactical things like pushing pull requests from, code all the way to code review, merge, and so on. That dynamic changed because we can no longer swivel in our chair and say, hey, can you look at my code? And we measure these things. That's part of what LinearB does. So we saw the change in our own measurements. And then we saw a few weeks later how the team adjusted to compensate for some of these changes. And, the metrics came back to where they should be. The other challenge, which is more recent, like what I just mentioned, was back in March and April 2020. In the past 12 months, I think the key challenges around growing so fast, we 3x'd our headcount, and doing that while in a mostly remote and time zone situation, that was, I think, a key challenge. Finding the talent, onboarding talent, and when the company grows that fast, you no longer know all the people the way you used to know when you were just 15 or 20. So these were, I think, the key challenges that happened in the last 12 months around remote.
Yep. And how did you overcome the hiring and the onboarding parts?
So hiring is still a challenge. Getting good talent is always hard here in Israel. And, we've invested a lot in both having synchronous meetings, all hands, places where everyone gets together and we have very open and very clear discussions about priorities, about how we're doing as a company, about numbers. That really helps get everyone together. Plus, whenever we were able to, get on a plane and get people together to actually physically meet, we didn't have a lot of those opportunities, but we had some options here and there. So these are ways for us to counter the fact that everyone is, distributed, remote, and also everyone is new, right? Everyone on the team is new because we're growing that fast.
Yes. And getting together, especially in light of these circumstances, has kind of this magic again. People get together and something happens that doesn't happen online.
We reappreciate that. Yeah, it's like
of course. Let's talk a little bit about the importance of effective communication. We all lead large distributed teams with multiple layers. And one of the main challenges for us, even in an on-site kind of setup, is to create shared strategic context, meaning putting everyone on the same page in terms of focus, in terms of priorities, in terms of goals, etc. Back at the office, there were multiple, channels, ways, unofficial, to repeat and reiterate that strategic shared context. But now there's less unofficial channels to do all these kind of unofficial channels are not applicable anymore in the remote setup. And so I'm wondering which methods, channels do you use today to ensure effective communication within your teams for the purpose of creating and reiterating that shared context? Scott?
Yeah, primarily as a company, we've moved to use Slack. It's interesting. Historically, we've always had asynchronous communication. Email has been around forever. We've always used chat. But primarily when you're in an office, I think the natural effective way to communicate is to go up and talk to somebody and do real-time communication. So it was very hard for us when we transitioned to a point where everyone was remote, and that wasn't possible anymore. We saw right away that everybody had more meetings, right? Because people wanted to communicate and align. The way they automatically reacted is let's get more meetings on the schedule. And people were, because they were home, scheduling meetings at 8 a.m. in the morning, which previously never happened. So some of what we did is we created this notion of like an async week, right? So during a week, everybody would cancel all of their meetings, and it would basically force people to work asynchronously. And what this did is it showed people the power and what you can get done asynchronously, and what sort of information you can share and stay together and stay aligned using asynchronous communication. And so when we did that, once we did that a few times, we noticed that people are meeting less, they're communicating more over Slack, they're sharing documents, sharing videos over Slack. So we found a way to use those tools more effectively so that we're having fewer meetings during the day.
Great. And was embracing a more documenting processes was a hard thing to do? There's always, the trade-off between documenting everything and moving fast, and in some setups, documentation was not part of the, routine.
Yeah, that's very true. We as a company have had to get a little bit better in terms of our documentation. I think we've also used commenting, and we have a product called Quip, which is very much a collaborative documenting system. And so there's a lot of communication, async communication, that happens within the document itself. That helps us iterate on it quickly and communicate on it quickly, but still leaves us at a point where we have a document that we can, at the end of the day, share amongst the team to stay aligned, rather than having to share that information mouth to mouth.
Yeah, excellent. Let's take a question or two from the crowd. So there's one question for Yishai. Yishai, how did your team solve the, hey, can you look at my code action that resulted in your numbers rebounding to pre-remote?
Yeah, so I would say two main things here. One is to, you begin by just being aware of those numbers, things like cycle time, or how long does it take for developers to pick up and review a PR. Just by being aware of these, by measuring these, that's like the base level. If you are aware of something that is important, you can try to improve it. And later on, some of the new tooling that we've rolled out as part of LinearB, and that goes into your question about the channels for communication, although much more tactic. We use Slack. We are not all in like Salesforce is, but we use Slack all the time, and our tooling basically leverages this to let people know that they're needed to review a PR or to look at someone's code automatically. We have a smart bot that helps developers manage this, and these things together really slash down response time and more than compensate for the swivel in my chair motion. So we've basically removed the manual communication around this, and now it happens automatically through our tooling, and the medium is Slack.
Great, thank you. I'll take another question. I think it's relevant for Anthony. Anthony, you told me backstage you've got distributed teams in different geographical locations. The question that pops up here is, what are some of the tools and techniques you use to manage different time zones? How effective are these? Again, in the context of communication and putting everyone in the same virtual room.
Yeah, this is it's quite a challenge, and the knee-jerk reaction is to stay up late, and that isn't the answer. It doesn't work. It doesn't scale. Really, what you need to do is it comes down to the async communication again. Across, I mean, all teams are different, so you should adapt your processes to suit your team. Here in the web team at Canonical, we do a few things. We have a shared meeting notes, and in fact, we just use a private GitHub repo which has an issue list, which has every email in it, has every meeting notes that has been taken with attendees. All of the teams subscribe to this repo, which means they get a nice email with images and descriptions, and it allows us to tag, search, and continue the discussion as a thread, as an issue. We also record a lot of our team meetings, so we perform some ritual team meetings like end of week fun meetings. Also, we have the end of iteration demos. They're all recorded and then they're posted to the team as an email summary at the end. That sort of helps make sure that people from other time zones can feel included and not isolated. Makes them feel like they have a team. And as much as possible, try and make all reviews async. So for code, that's been the case for a very long time. But when it comes to designing and UX decisions, this feels like a very new area. We use a few tools. We use Zeppelin and a couple of other Miro to share ideas, to collect ideas. We do retros in Miro. We spend the week building up the Miro board, and then at the end, a summary email is sent out to sort of everyone to end that week's worth of retros. So yeah, that's a couple of tips and tricks. But those tips and tricks are not just useful for people in different time zones. Is hugely beneficial for teams of the members of the team who are more reserved, who don't like to speak up in meetings. And myself particularly, I like to think through an idea, get my thoughts together, and then put forward my opinion. I don't like having a meeting and having to make a decision on just with 5 seconds to think about it. So if you can do async meetings and much more emails, then I feel like that's the best way forward.
Great. Scott, so Anthony just raised a topic that I think I find personally interesting. When we were together in a room, then you could have identified, the more quiet people, you could have pinged them to get their opinion, etc. In a remote setup, it's harder to detect. And I wonder, how do you keep remote and distributed teams in the loop and preventing the feeling of some of the people feeling isolated and siloed?
Yeah, that's a good question. is actually interesting for us as a company. Before the pandemic, when we were mostly in an office, it was actually a bigger challenge for us because we typically had a group that was in the office, and then there'd be one or two folks that were remote. And including those remote folks were really challenging, partly because technology made it difficult sometimes to have those folks communicate equally as equally the people who are in the room. But also with whiteboards and things of that nature, it was hard to have those remote folks follow the conversation all the time. With us all being remote, all of a sudden it got to be a lot more equal. And within a video meeting, it becomes very clear as to, who is participating in that conversation and how they're participating. So as a manager, I can easily look at a person who may not be participating and directly call out their name and say, hey, do you have any ideas on this? What are your thoughts? And so I think, having people be inclusive when they're fully remote is actually, in my mind, easier than when we're in more of a hybrid situation.
Excellent, thank you. Moving on to the topic of building trust with your team. I personally feel that one of the things that we lost when we moved to a remote setup is the volume of data points and signals that we collect as human beings, right? Behavior, social cues, a pat on the shoulder, things that we can detect, and that again gives us signals that we use. Without these signals, we have to rely on other behaviorals and signals to be able to build confidence and trust in people. And so I'm wondering, how do you guys build that trust? How do you make sure that people feel comfortable and trust each other, both within the team and then as a separate topic between the manager or the leader and the team members itself? Yishai, that's for you.
Yeah, so I totally agree with the importance of the primate level signals like touching, breaking bread together, the face-to-face. I think one thing that we are always trying to do is create opportunities for that to happen, even when the culture is remote or people are spread apart. And I think even periodically meeting people, and even people that meet each other just once, that goes a long way in creating that biological level of enabling trust. So I think putting a lot of emphasis on those opportunities is important. And then beyond that, I think what helps us is being very clear about and again open about what's going on, our numbers, our priorities, like not trying to do this in a top-down way, but including everyone and being very straightforward about things. I think helps cut a lot of second guessing or sometimes people, do I really understand? Do I know what's going on? We are trying to make sure that never happens. Specifically, if we drill down into the way we work inside engineering, then having very clear, concise goals and working agreements on how we should behave in terms of writing the code, committing it, reviewing it, the cycles around, getting value from by changes made to our code base and then deployments to production. Having very obvious and measurable goals is another way to foster trust. Everyone knows what's the expected behavior. So it's easy to know I'm doing good. I'm okay with my peers. I can hold them accountable and be accountable. So that helps us with trust as well.
Right, thank you. Scott, how do distributed teams in Salesforce build trust among each other and between the leaders and the team members?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that over the past 6 months, as we've seen some, alleviation of COVID, at least before Omicron, came about, we've been starting to meet again as teams. These are mostly, outdoor meetings, for dinner, for lunch, just so people can have more personal conversations. For folks that don't feel comfortable with that, or when we're in a situation where cases are high, we try to do remote events. So they're online. They're not as good, but you can do things like cooking classes, wine tasting, games. Anything that is unrelated to work that helps people connect and bond and build relationships. We've also done things around specific team building exercises. So, for example, we'll go around the team and ask, what are your top 3 values and how do they impact your life? And so people start to get more vulnerable and share more personal things about themselves. And when that happens, when people can share as a team, people feel a lot more comfortable and a lot more connected, and it builds a lot more trust.
Yeah, fully agree. And some of these elements that were, also relevant in the, a physical world are still relevant today, like the things that you just mentioned, and also following up on actions, following up on promises, on commitments, etc. That's still very valid, even the remote setup, and that helps create the trust. A question from the crowd. How do you guys deal with cameras off during meetings that require that type of interaction? Any friendly policy should be mandatory? For example, Scrum daily meetings or planning to turn the cameras on? Anthony.
Yeah, this is an interesting one, a new cultural change. Here at Canonical, we would never mandate someone turn their camera on because people could turn their camera off for different reasons. That's it all comes from a culture and a strong leadership team who can identify why that person's got their camera off. And people sometimes just don't feel like they want to be on camera. I mean, they could have been on calls all day already, and it takes a lot of your energy to be on a call all day. And also, the same as people working from home, you need to trust people. You need to believe, have the metrics and know if they're, doing good work. If they're not involved in a meeting, then that's maybe another thing to question. But really do this in one-to-ones. Do this out of bounds if you can, and try and get to the underlying issue. It probably isn't really an issue, but I wouldn't suggest making cameras on mandatory, personally.
Yishai, does it work in the same way in LinearB?
Yeah, like mandating is, I think, totally off. I think we're still small enough to be able to comfortably just talk with each other about this and say, hey, like I'd like to see you, but not in a more like a peer-to-peer thing. There's a bunch of places where people are in the meeting, but they're also doing something else, right? It's not the core thing that they're doing. They want to listen in, maybe participate, but they're not paying the full attention. And it's okay because you don't have to play all the roles in all the meetings. So sometimes that could be a good case for camera off, maybe even a signal. I'm here, but I'm not fully participating, fully engaged in the meeting. So sometimes that's a good way to signal that.
Thank you. Another question from the audience. How do you make sure team members are happy in your teams if you don't meet them frequently? What techniques do you use for that, keeping people motivated, happy, etc.? Scott, how do you do that?
Well, I do meet my team frequently. I think one-on-ones are the most important technique we have as a manager. And so even while we're remote, I have one-on-ones with my team members once a week. And so from that, I keep that open connection and that open conversation with my team members. And I hope that by building that relationship, they can be open with me and tell me when they're not happy. But when they're not telling me, I can certainly observe it when I meet with them and maybe ask them about it. So I think it's important, even though we're remote, to continue to have those one-on-ones with your team members.
Thank you. Anthony, any techniques to keep your team motivated and happy in a remote setup?
Very similar, actually. The one-to-ones are by far the most important meeting of my week. One thing that I've learned over the years is as a manager, that a one-to-one might feel like just another meeting in the sea of meetings that you've had that day or that week. But actually, you should try your best as much as possible never to cancel or reschedule them. They are, that the people who report to you are likely to have less meetings, and this is likely to be one of the most important ones of the week. So any disruption there is pretty damning. And ask for feedback. Don't be afraid to hear feedback from your team. What I do quite often is I get involved in the work. I try my best. I show that I'm no longer the expert in the room, but I'll show that I'm happy to chip in and ask the simple questions and allow my team to help me. I think that really helps if you let your reports help you for a problem. It really shows collaboration.
Yep, agreed. One thing that we started doing more frequently is to celebrate wins more frequently and probably in, I don't want to say exaggerated way, but yeah, emphasizing the wins. Yishai, do you find yourself do that more often in your remote setup?
Yeah, I think we should do more. We know, like we're aware that sometimes celebrating wins, we have this mindset of okay, we just won this, now there's the next challenge. So sometimes it's not the most natural thing for us to exaggerate with celebrations, but it's something we are aware of and are working to do better in. I totally agree that this is a great technique to pull everyone in and if done right, gives everyone a feeling that they're part of something larger, and they have an impact into that something. So totally agree with that technique.
Yeah, thank you. Another question we're being asked is not switching off after work, carrying on work late in the evenings because one can, etc. How do you handle this imbalance / cultural element? Scott?
Yeah, so we encourage our team members to find time to switch off. We encourage them to go into their Slack and set a time by when their notifications no longer appear. It's hard, right? I think we all, as individuals, when we're working on a problem, we take that problem home with us, right? And when there's a big milestone the next day, often we're working late. But it's important that people can set those boundaries. So using notification settings in Slack, using the working team agreements like we spoke about earlier, we're finding mechanisms and enabling individuals to create a time where their work shuts off and they move back into their personal life.
Thank you. Anthony?
Yeah, this one's an interesting question. I've also fell foul of this quite often. I'm not the best at this myself. But I think it also goes the other way. I think if we allow people to work when they feel most comfortable, it gives them more freedom in the day. So if they happen to need the morning off, then there'll be no qualms for me on that. As long as they can contribute to the work that they're supposed to be doing, then that's no problem at all. That said, I think in Canonical we have a pretty good culture of turning off. We use Mattermost, not Slack, but we turn off notifications generally. One thing that helps is we'll post in our team channels when we're leaving, say goodbye, and that tends to have a good feeling of sort of don't connect with me for a little while, and also it mentally allows you to sort of let go and step away from the computer. But it is very difficult. I find people who work from their living rooms and don't have offices, rooms that they can shut their computer away in, tend to suffer from this a little bit more. So maybe that's something to suggest if someone's struggling to find a way of managing their work-life balance.
Yeah. Thank you. Yishai, what do you do to make sure people establish clear boundaries? And how do you set these expectations with them?
Right. I agree with Anthony that it's not just about the time, it's about the boundaries. So much harder now when we work from home to create some of those boundaries between work time and family time. We are split between Israel and the US, so there's a built-in tension around time zones. Some of the things we've recently been doing more of is to both encourage people to set time off, like time that is protected for meetings. So don't schedule meetings for me at my 7:30 a.m., at least not recurring ones. Being much more aware in our Slack usage, mentions, and so on, sometimes scheduled messages, or just, being, if I'm, slacking someone, then I would just say, hey, future Lisa, so that setting the expectation that I'm not expecting a response right now because it's outside of work hours. So I think awareness and some Slack etiquette goes a long way. And then, as high as our one of our values in the company is that to ensure that everyone takes personal time, takes time to take care of oneself every day, every week, and we are trying to drive that message home. People need to take care of themselves, and work is far from everything in life.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think that was a great point you made, Yishai. As leaders, we need to model it as well, right? So often when I have a message, I have an idea in my head that I want to communicate to someone at night, I'll use a send later mechanism. So I'll set the message to arrive, at 9 a.m. the next day. And so that way I'm modeling the fact that I'm not, trying to communicate with my team at night and giving them that ability to take the night off and work on their personal life.
Great point, Scott. I'm with you. Another question from the audience, probably the last one, and I think it's to you, Yishai. Sorry, to you, Scott. You mentioned effective one-on-ones, and so the question is regarding one-on-ones, how do we adopt to intercultural differences? How to approach motivation with people that may have very different expectations and communication styles?
Wow. That is one of the hardest things I think I've approached as a manager, because every country has different cultural norms and cultural expectations, and it's very often difficult to understand sometimes what those are. But what I try to do is, again, in those one-on-ones, part of the goal of that is to build a relationship with that individual and to get to know that individual. So even if I'm not, completely aware of their cultural norms, I can get to know them as a person and understand what's important to them and what impacts them. And by doing so, I can sort of tailor my communication and how I work with them that meets, those needs of their expectations.
Yep. Anthony, how do you do that?
Yeah, this one's a really difficult question. I've had experiences where people are very quiet, and they're often very difficult one-to-ones, because I like to listen in my one-to-ones, and if they're not willing to open up, then I normally start a one-to-one with something about life. I spend most of my one-to-ones talking about how's your life, how's your family, what are you up to this weekend? Try and talk as much about their life and be open yourself. When someone says to you, "How are you?" at the beginning of a one-to-one, and think about it and answer. Answer really how you feel. That often can open up the whole channel of communication that they feel like it's a very formal meeting. Well, it doesn't have to be. It could be, it just try and open that rapport and then listen to them as much as possible.
Thank you. So let's try and round up by sharing one key takeaway on leading distributed teams. What do you guys, what's your one piece of advice as an engineering leader? Yishai, starting with you.
Yeah, so for engineering leaders, my advice would be to First of all, be aware of the impact that being remote brings to how the team works and how the team delivers. It's useful to measure, key metrics around productivity, around efficiency of the org that help you gauge that impact and know that you're doing the right things to mitigate or to compensate. Know that there are tools and there are methods to help and mitigate. We've discussed some of these today, and they range from the tactical to the strategic. But it's not just okay. It's happening, and I just need to do my best. You need to be deliberate about this.
Yes,
that would be my my 2 cents.
In a remote setup, a lot of things are happening under the hood, and they need to be surfaced. I agree. Scott, what's your one piece of advice to any engineering leader to be successful in a remote distributed environment?
Yeah, just to follow up on what Yishai was saying, I think it's important as a team to step back and be very deliberate about how that team is going to work together. We talked about team agreements up front. I think if you don't have those conversations about setting expectations about how you're going to work, you're just going to go in and run into problems because one will be trying to work at a certain hour, the other one, won't accept that, for example, and you end up having clashes and difficult relationships. So just taking that time up front to have those conversations, align on the best way for everyone to work together as a team will make things a lot smoother as you go forward.
Agreed. By the way, also setting success metrics that are known in advance, and that's a way to make sure that we bridge even different, cultural differences, etc. Makes sense to me. Anthony, what's your one piece of advice to any engineering leader?
Yeah, so for me, the most important thing for any team working remotely, particularly, is having a really good team culture and a friendly culture and a team that supports itself. And that emanates from the leadership. So if you can show caring and servant leadership from the front, willing to duck any praise and take all the bullets, then that your team's got your back, and they know the vice versa. Then I feel like you'll have a really good, really healthy work relationship with them.
Agreed. So thank you very much. I'd like to thank our panelists, Scott, Yishai, Anthony, for their meaningful and actionable insights and tips. I'd like to thank LinearB for partnering with us, Codility, on this event, and wish you a great day, evening, night, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.